Mrs. Fisher, aye. Mrs. Gillibrand, aye. Mr. Markey, aye. Mr. Warnock, aye. Ms. Duckworth, aye. Mr. Van Hollen, aye. Mr. Hawley, aye. Mr. Cruz, no. Mr. Ricketts, aye. Mr. Peters, aye. Ms. Rosen, aye. Mr. Sullivan,
To bring it back?
Yeah.
Yes, that'd be great, because I have a copy I could read from, but
aye.
that would be
Mr. Vance, Mr. Vance. No. Mr. Sanders, Mr. Sanders. Aye. Mrs. Hyde-Smith, Mrs. Hyde-Smith. Aye. Ms. Lummis, Ms. Lummis. Aye.
390.
Mr. Booker, Mr. Booker. Aye. Mr. Bennett, Mr. Bennett. Aye. Mr. Welch, Mr. Welch. Aye. Mr. Menendez, Mr. Menendez. Aye. Mr. Wicker, Mr. Wicker. Aye. Mr. Cotton, Mr. Cotton. Aye. Mr. Bozeman, Mr. Bozeman. Aye. Mr. Lee, no. Ms. Murkowski, aye. Mr. Haggerty, no.
On this vote, the yeas are 88, the nays are 9. Under the previous order requiring 60 votes for the passage of this bill, the bill is passed.
Madam President, it's been a day full of twists and turns, but the American people can breathe a sigh of relief. There will be no government shutdown. Democrats have said from the start that the only solution for avoiding a shutdown is bipartisanship, and we're glad that Speaker McCarthy has finally heeded our message. In the end, more Democrats supported this bill in the House than Republicans, proving bipartisanship was the best answer all along. I want to thank my colleagues here in the Senate, especially our appropriators, yourself, Madam President, Susan Collins, and Leader McConnell. Our bipartisan work in the Senate set the tone for the bill we're about to pass. Our bipartisanship made this possible and showed the House that they had to act. We will keep the government open for 45 days with a clean CR at current funding levels. And we avoided all of the extreme, nasty, and harmful cuts MAGA Republicans wanted. No 30% cuts across the board. No 30% cuts to things like health care, to the Social Security Administration, to the nutrition programs for kids. Full reauthorization of the FAA until December 31st. And the poison pill amendments, of which there were scores, MAGA-inspired riders, were all removed from the bill. After trying to take our government hostage, MAGA Republicans won nothing. So one more time, it is good Speaker McCarthy finally heeded our message that bipartisanship was and is and remains the only way. He could have made this decision weeks ago. Now, I've said from day one, this is a bridge CR, a temporary solution, not the final destination. We will not stop fighting for more economic and security assistance for Ukraine. Majorities in both parties support Ukraine aid, and doing more is vital for America's security and for democracy around the world. But this CR is still very good news for the American people. Today, MAGA extremists have failed, bipartisanship has prevailed, and both parties have come together to avert a shutdown. Once again, thank you to Leader McConnell, Appropriations Chair Patty Murray, Vice Chair Susan Collins, and members on both sides of the aisle who came together. Today's CR would not have been possible without the Senate's good work. The Senate showed that bipartisanship was the only way, and the same will be true again in 45 days. I yield the floor. I do not yet yield the floor. President, I move to proceed to executive session to consider Calendar 319.
Question is on the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Ayes appear to have it. Ayes do have it. Motion's agreed to. Clerk report.
Nomination, Department of State, James C. O'Brien of Nebraska to be an Assistant Secretary, European and Eurasian Affairs.
I send a cloture motion to the desk.
Clerk will report.
Cloture motion, we the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close debate on the nomination of Executive Calendar Number 319, James C. O'Brien of Nebraska to be an Assistant Secretary of State, European and Eurasian Affairs, signed by 17 senators, as follows.
I ask consent the reading of the names be waived.
Without objection.
I move to proceed to legislative session.
Question is on the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Ayes appear to have it. The ayes have it. Motion is agreed to.
I move to proceed to executive session to consider Calendar 176.
Questions on the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Ayes appear to have it. Ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. Clerk will report.
Nomination, the Judiciary, Brendan Abel Herson of Maryland to be United States District Judge for the District of Maryland.
I send a cloture motion to the desk.
Clerk will report.
Cloture motion, we, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a closed debate on the nomination of Executive Calendar Number 176, Brendan Abel Herson of Maryland to be United States District Judge for the District of Maryland, signed by 19 senators, as follows.
I ask consent the reading of the names be waived.
Without objection.
I move to proceed to legislative session.
Questions on the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Ayes appear to have it. Ayes do have it. The motion is agreed to.
I move to proceed to executive session to consider Calendar 264.
Questions on the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Ayes appear to have it. Ayes do have it. Motion is agreed to. Clerk will report.
Nomination, the Judiciary, Susan Kim to Clerk of Michigan to be United States District Judge for the Eastern District of Michigan.
I send a cloture motion to the desk.
The clerk will report.
Cloture motion, we, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a closed debate on the nomination of Executive Calendar Number 264, Susan Kim to Clerk of Michigan to be United States District Judge for the Eastern District of Michigan, signed by 17 senators, as follows.
I ask consent the reading of the names be waived.
Without objection.
Finally, I ask unanimous consent that the mandatory quorum calls for the cloture motions filed today, September the 30th, be waived.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent the Senate consider the following nominations en bloc, calendars 252, 254. That the Senate vote on the nominations en bloc without intervening action or debate. The motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table. That the President be immediately notified of the Senate's actions.
Without objection.
The
The question occurs on the nominations on block. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The nominations are confirmed on block.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate consider the following nominations. All nominations placed on the Secretary's desk in the Air Force, Army, Marine Corps, and Navy, that the nominations be confirmed en bloc. The motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate. That no further motions be in order to any of the nominations, and that the President be immediately notified of the Senate's actions.
Without objection.
Is that all of our? I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to legislative session and be in a period of morning business with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I understand there's a bill at the desk, and I ask for its first reading.
The clerk will read the title of the bill for the first time.
H.R. 5692, an act making supplemental appropriations for the fiscal year ending September 30, 2024, and for other purposes.
I now ask for a second reading, and in order to place the bill on the calendar under the provisions of Rule 14, I object to my own request.
The objection having been heard, the bill will be read a second time on the next legislative day.
I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Finance be discharged and the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of S-2231.
The clerk will report.
S-2231, a bill to amend Title V of the Social Security Act to support stillbirth prevention and research and for other purposes.
Without objection, the committee is discharged.
I further ask
The
the bill
Senate
be
will proceed.
I further ask that the bill be considered, read a third time, and passed. The motion to reconsider be considered and made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent the Committee on Commerce be discharged of Senate Res 310, and the Senate now proceed to the en bloc consideration of the following Senate resolutions. S-Res 310, S-Res 390, S-Res 391, S-Res 392. 392 being the Maui wildfire first responders.
Is there objection to proceeding to the resolutions en bloc? Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent the resolutions be agreed to, the preambles be agreed to, and that the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table, all en bloc.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the consideration of S-Res 393, which is at the desk.
The clerk will report.
S-Res 393, to honor the life and death of Duncan McLaughlin Locke Faircloth, former senator for the state of North Carolina.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed.
I ask unanimous consent the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, and that the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Without objection.
And finally, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate two of them. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate completes its business today, it stand adjourned under the previous provisions of S-Res 393 until 3 p.m. on Tuesday, October 3rd. That following the prayer and pledge, the journal of proceedings be approved to date, the morning hour be deemed expired, the time for the two leaders be reserved for their use later in the day, and morning business be closed. That upon the conclusion of morning business, the Senate proceed to executive session, resume consideration of the O'Brien nomination. Further, that the cloture motions filed during today's session ripen at 5:30 p.m. on Tuesday.
Without objection.
If there's no further business to come before the Senate, I ask that it stand adjourned under the previous order, following the remarks of Chairman Murray.
Without objection.
Good job.
President Pro Tem.
Mr. President, I've been down here all week saying again and again, the only way that we're going to avoid a shutdown is a CR that can get bipartisan support to quickly pass the House and Senate. And we've been working nonstop to pass that common sense bipartisan CR that I put together with my colleagues across the aisle. But tonight we had a bill from the House that passed in a bipartisan way with nearly every House Democrat voting in support. And I'm now glad the Senate has been able to pass it as well and get it to the President's desk for his signature. This bill does not contain the devastating cuts House Republicans were pushing just yesterday. It does not contain the ineffective partisan border provisions they were demanding. So, Mr. President, there were good reasons to vote for it. First and foremost, it will prevent a senseless government shutdown, one that House Republicans have been pushing us towards for weeks. But this bill also meets the President's full request for disaster relief fund, and that's good and important to so many of us. It will ensure that our brave federal firefighters don't see a drastic pay cut, and it maintains current funding levels through November 17th. We know a CR is never a good long-term policy outcome, but it is certainly good to see that some House Republicans have, at the least, for this moment, given up the fruitless and cruel cuts they were demanding just yesterday. It's good to see some of those members coming to their senses. But we also have to be clear about where this bill falls seriously short, why we found ourselves in this moment, and how House Republicans' recklessness has caused so much unnecessary chaos. Because let's be clear, there is a lot of work left to do now that we've passed this bill. First, we have to absolutely do more to support our allies in Ukraine. Dictators across the world are watching. Will we stand with democracy? I say yes. The Senate absolutely will stand with our friends in Ukraine as they continue to defend themselves against Putin's brutal invasion. Because continuing to support Ukraine is not just about addressing a humanitarian crisis, it is also about our own national security and what kind of world we want to live in. It is in America's national security interest to send a strong message to dictators like Putin that they cannot just invade a sovereign nation and steamroll democracy wherever and whenever they want. And let's make sure we are crystal clear about this. There are strong, bipartisan supermajorities in both chambers have shown that they understood that. Just a few days ago, support for Ukraine got over 330 votes in the House. 3 in 4 House members. The U.S. does not abandon its allies, and the U.S. will not give Putin a free pass to continue his brutal war of aggression. I need to make it clear, we are sticking with our allies in Ukraine, and we're not letting up. We're going to make sure we get this done, period. So I will work with all of my colleagues to make certain we stand with Ukraine and deliver the resources in a supplemental we know are so vital at this moment, and do it in a timely manner. I know my vice chair shares that commitment. We both look forward to continuing our efforts and working with many colleagues on both sides of the aisle. We, of course, also need to take action to address the child care crisis, especially as the funding cliff makes this even worse for parents, providers, and our economy. To my Republican colleagues, I'm positive you are hearing from your constituents on this. I am ready to work with anyone to make progress here, so please talk to me and let's work together on that front. Now, let me also say there was no reason for it to come this close. House Republicans should have worked with us from the very start. Instead, they spent weeks entertaining the most extreme ideas from their far right, spending the last week voting on really extreme appropriations bill that would not even actually have averted a shutdown. Appropriations bills that would deny our service members the ability to get reproductive care they need in emergencies, severely restricting women's access to medication abortion in every state, bills that would decimate rural communities, eliminate essential resources for our diplomats abroad, and so much more. And then, just yesterday, they proposed an across-the-board 30% cut to virtually all domestic spending. They wanted to gut funding come Monday for childcare, support for K-12 schools, law enforcement, heating assistance for families on tight budgets, air traffic controllers, life-saving cancer research, much more. Even that proposal, apparently, wasn't enough for the most extreme members of the House Republican Conference, and it went down in flames. But let's not forget, and I know the American people won't, that the vast majority of House Republicans voted just yesterday to gut programs families count on, programs that keep all of us safe, by 30%. Needless to say, I am glad to see some of them have, at least for the moment, abandoned those cruel efforts to slash funding for families with no rhyme or reason. Now, as we look ahead, I urge my House Republican colleagues, spare us and the American people the unnecessary drama and chaos, and learn to work with your colleagues, not against them. Look, the Speaker and the President shook hands on a deal. Congress passed it into law. We are going to stick with it. I voted for this bill today with a firm commitment that here in the Senate we will not waste any time in moving forward to support our Ukrainian allies, and a continued determination to make bipartisan progress on the many issues we need to address. And of course, we still need to pass all 12 of our bipartisan appropriations bills, so we aren't back here in a few weeks. On that note, we need to get moving to the military construction, Veterans Affairs, THUD, and Ag appropriations minibus that a few of my colleagues, very few of them, have been blocking. I hope both leaders will facilitate the Vice Chair and I getting back to work on those bills in the next few days. And as we pass short-term CR, we need to make progress to begin conferencing our spending bills with the House to avoid another CR or an omnibus at the end of this year, which I know my colleagues are focused on avoiding. And if we're going to get any of that done, it has to be bipartisan. It is going to involve us being serious and focused on getting our job done to have real results for American people. If there is one lesson for House Republicans to take from the absolute chaos they have caused this past week, it is that partisanship is not a path forward, it's a path to chaos. The only way to avoid a shutdown, the only way to get things done, especially in a divided Congress, is to sit down with the other side and do the hard work of negotiating, talking to one another, not to cave to the most extreme members of your caucus or go back on your word. I think most of us have known that from the start. Apparently, Speaker McCarthy needed to learn that lesson the hard way. Now it's time for him to show he has truly learned it. I urge him not to retreat back to a partisan corner, not to push for extreme partisan spending bills that go back on the deal he made just a few months ago. If you follow the most extreme members of your party and go down that same partisan path, they're going to lead you to the same dead end. The American people need us to move forward. They need us to work together. The senior senator from Maine and I have 12 bipartisan bills in the Senate. We drafted them after many hearings, serious debate, and discussion with members on both sides of the aisle. And they passed our committee in overwhelming bipartisan votes, unanimous or near unanimous votes. These are serious bills that can be signed into law. Let's now leave behind the partisan politics being championed by the loudest voices who are the farthest on the right and come together so we can help people and solve problems, just like we were sent to do. I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin.
Madam President.
Senator from Colorado is recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. I'd ask the quorum call be vitiated,
Will.
and I'd ask to be able to speak without objection. And
Without objection.
thank you. Thank you, Madam President. I'm sorry that you're having to stay here so late tonight.